The Assessing Retirement Risk part of the Retirement Planning series takes a closer look at the results of the retirement scenarios that we structured in Part 1 and projected in Part 2. We're going to be looking at 4 retirement planning risks and evaluating the potential impact they have on John and Mary Sample's retirement plans. We've got stock market risk, liquidity risk, inflation risk, and longevity risk. There are, of course, considerably more than 4 areas of risk in retirement, and we can't cover every possibility today. However, I do want to briefly mention 2 other areas of risk that absolutely should be considered. The first of these 2 areas of risk is unexpected changes to a specific source of income. This risk is often present in defined benefit pensions, and we touched on this briefly in Part 1. It's very easy to be complacent with the regular monthly income that these pensions provide and not take a moment to consider how reliable it is. So if you have a spouse and you pass away, what are the terms for the surviving spouse? Will they continue to receive the full amount, a reduced amount, or will payments stop altogether? If your pension is from the private sector, you also need to consider the financial status of the pension plan. If the pension is underfunded, meaning that it does not have enough assets to meet its obligations to its employees, the plan may decide to reduce your payment. The second area of risk that I want to briefly touch on is the risk of an unexpected change to your health. So if you're still working, you need to consider the impact of a health event that prevents you from earning an income. If this risk is not addressed, it can not only prevent you from saving for retirement, but it can also require you to start drawing a retirement income much earlier than you had anticipated. If you're fully retired and no longer dependent on your ability to earn an income, this risk is far lower, but it's still a good idea to consider how an unexpected healthcare cost would impact your overall financial situation. Okay, now back to our case. When planning for your retirement, you need to estimate what your average annual investment return will be. If your actual average annual investment return turns out to be higher than you had planned for, this would of course be a positive development. On the other hand, if your actual returns turn out to be lower than you planned for, you run the risk of running out of money. This part is fairly intuitive, but what's less obvious is that the ups and downs of the stock market can cause you to run out of money or not meet your objectives in retirement, even though the expected investment return is earned in retirement. And this is referred to as sequence of returns risk. Now, before we look at how this risk impacts the Sample's retirement plans, we can first go through an example to really understand what is sequence of return risk and how does it work. We're going to look at the returns of an investment portfolio in 3 different scenarios. In scenario 1, the portfolio returns 6% in all 5 years, and so of course the average annual return works out to be 6%. In scenario 2, the portfolio had different returns in each of the 5 years, but as in scenario 1, it also returned 6%. In scenario 3, the portfolio had the exact same returns as in scenario 2, but in a different order. In this case, the average return also works out to be 6%. The returns of an investment portfolio are largely driven by the overall stock market. Over shorter time periods, the stock market can be very volatile, and we can see this by examining the returns of the S&P 500, a major stock market index that's comprised of 500 of the largest companies in the US. Now, if you take the total return of this index from 1926 to 2023, a 98-year period, and calculate out the average annual return, you'll see it's approximately 10%. However, if you look at the return in each of those 98 calendar years, you'll find that it was only between 8% and 12% in 6 of the years. The rest of the time, or 92 of those 98 years, the return was either less than 8% or more than 12%. Now let's look at the growth of a $500,000 portfolio. In all scenarios, the $500,000 would grow to $669,113. We can see this as a buy and hold example. The ups and downs of the stock market have no impact on the ending value, and it's just the average annual return that matters to investors. Now in this example, we're going to introduce withdrawals. This is much more representative of life and retirement, as we need to make withdrawals from our portfolio to provide an income stream. So in scenario 1, the portfolio's ending value would be $500,000. This is not surprising. The $30,000 withdrawals are exactly 6% of the portfolio, and so it's just the growth that's withdrawn each year. And we still have the initial capital remaining at the end. In scenario 2, the portfolio's ending value would be $520,580. In scenario 3, the portfolio's ending value would be $474,929. Now, even though the average annual return was 6% for all three portfolios, the ending value in scenario 2 is $45,000 higher than it is in scenario 3. This is because when we introduce withdrawals, like we do in retirement, the returns that occur in the earlier years are more impactful than those that occur in the later years. The impact of the unfavorable sequence of returns in scenario 3 will become more and more evident over the next few years. This is because the percentage of the portfolio that's needed to generate the $30,000 annual portfolios will increase every year, causing the remaining balance to deplete at an alarming rate. The risk of your retirement being derailed by an unfavorable sequence of returns will really depend on your situation. And this risk can be measured by using sophisticated financial planning software to run multiple retirement scenarios. So each scenario would have randomized sequence of investment returns. And I've done this for the samples to see in their situation what the impact would be. So summarizing the results of the 10 simulations we see, in 60% of the years, the samples are still able to achieve their objectives. But in 40% of the years, it's going to result in them running out of money before their assumed life expectancy, with the worst case being a shortfall at their age 87. Now, I don't think anyone would be comfortable with these odds, and it clearly represents a high risk to the sample's retirement. Liquidity risk. Life is unpredictable, and regardless of how much you plan ahead, there will always be expenses that you don't anticipate. It's therefore important to be able to pay for unexpected expenses in a way that doesn't impact your retirement in a negative way. This requires you to have funds that are stable and can be accessed quickly and tax efficiently. So let's look at the sample situation. A significant portion of the sample's financial resources are investment accounts, which provide them with a high degree of control over their cash flow. They also have a balance of before tax and after tax funds. So this enables them to cover unexpected expenses while maintaining control of their taxable incomes. So overall, the samples have low liquidity risk. An example of a situation with high liquidity risk would be a couple with very little in terms of savings and investments, and instead are relying on the income received from defined benefit pensions. Inflation risk. When looking at your retirement income over a possible 30-year span, it is key to understand the purchasing power of $1 today will likely be significantly different in your later retirement years. A retirement plan will assume an average inflation rate to account for the cost of living that will happen during retirement. If the actual inflation rate ends up being higher, the result will be an unexpected reduction in real purchasing power. And this may require you to change your lifestyle or risk outliving your money. Assessing your reliable income is a good place to start when it comes to evaluating the impact of inflation risk. Mary's pension income makes up 20% of the sample's reliable income sources. Because it's not indexed to inflation, the real value of the income that it provides is reduced each year by that inflation rate. Fortunately for the samples, their CPP and OAS makes up the majority of their reliable income, and both of these benefits are, of course, adjusted to inflation. Inflation also poses a risk to the sample's investment portfolio, and their investments will need to be managed in a way that minimizes the potential impact. Overall, the samples have moderate inflation risk. Longevity risk. So outliving your money is the most common financial worry for retirees. When I say outliving your money, I'm referring to your retirement assets. You would still receive the reliable income that you are entitled to, and so the impact of outliving your money can vary greatly from one person to the next. For the samples, it would require them to reduce spending by approximately 50% in order to only live on their reliable income sources, being their government entitlements and Mary's pension. The sample's retirement projections had a relatively small margin of success, which points to a higher degree of longevity risk. On the other hand, the samples are homeowners, and having the option to tap into the equity of your home, if your situation really called for it, it certainly reduces this risk. The sample's retirement plan assumes a joint life expectancy of 98, which is based on a more conservative 25% probability of survival. However, this still leaves a 1 in 4 chance that one of them lives past age 98. So we can assess their longevity risk by using a longer life expectancy. I projected the retirement plan using a life expectancy of age 100. Their retirement plans are still achievable, but this would be the limit, as their investment assets are projected to be fully depleted at the end of the year. Overall, the samples have moderate, middle-of-the-road longevity risk.